Is JM to Win. I'm here with a brand new podcast for you. We're calling it the Absolutely Epic Early Week Podcast. Our goal is just kind of bring you some early week thoughts, our first glance thoughts, our first reactions and whatnot to get you ready for the DFS week ahead. I have a couple special guests who will be hanging out with me today and every week moving forward this season. First one is Bobby Fi. Bobby, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing? Just happy to be on the show with you guys. What's up, Grant? What's up, Jake?
You have a good week two or what? What happened in week two?
Oh my God, man. I had a lot of the right plays, but a lot of the wrong ones. Steve Smith, Tajay Sharp destroyed me. Rashad Jennings. What hurt me probably more than anything was Danny Woodhead's injury. And probably a little bit of the lack of, I really thought that somehow in that San Diego game, Jacksonville would find a way to go off, and kind of crushed me. But I had a lot of, the rest of my lineups were solid. It's not one of those days. It was one of those things. If I could have put that game together and it could have gone a little differently, I think I might have had a shot, but not my week.
There were a lot of landmines in week two. So I was it's tough for me as a single lineup guy to avoid all the landmines. I was pretty fortunate. This last week, I could have had a huge weekend. I took a stand against Travis Benjamin and used Julius Thomas in the flex on DraftKings at the exact same price. So that would have been the difference between a good weekend and a great weekend. But learn from that and move on. So our other buddy hanging out with us is Grant. How do we pronounce your name? Is it Nefer or Nafer?
It's Nefer. It's like the thing on your leg and also the thing on your leg that's made of hair.
Grant, how happy are you that I didn't answer that question? Because I still can't.
I'm pretty happy.
For a long time, I still can't answer the question.
Oh, it's so every single phone call ever.
Everybody gets my last name as Toline, and it's actually Toline. So Bobby's got it easy with Firestone.
That's good to know, though. I thought it was Toline. So I appreciate the question.
Yeah, my dad would always say to lean against the wall is how he'd get people to remember it.
That's easy.
Grant, we're gonna start out for listeners. We're gonna try something here and see if we get banned by Roto Grinders or the airwaves. We're gonna start out each week with Grant's rant. We're going to give Grant 2 minutes max to talk about his week, rant about his week. If you haven't met Grant in the past, this is a big risk we're taking because Grant is a bit of a fireball whiskey unto himself. So, Grant, you've got 2 minutes for Grant's rant. Take it.
Well, first of all, I want to mention that I'm sitting here in my favorite pair of shorts, and they just finally ripped in the place between my legs. And every single pair of shorts or pants that I've ever bought has ripped right down the middle. Every single one of them. And I keep wearing them for like a month or two afterwards until I realize it's a terrible idea. But anyways, that's just something that's on my mind right now, and I'm real sad about it. But speaking of getting ripped a new one, every time I play a Chargers player, they get injured. Every single time. I was playing Keenan Allen both this year and last year when he got injured. And I had him in most of my lineups where no one else did. And this week I decided, okay, Danny Woodhead's going to do great. And he just tears everything. Not only that, I had certain lineups on aces where McCown and Garoppolo are in the same lineup. And so 30 minutes in, I'm jumping for joy and all happy about everything in life. And then 5 minutes later, I'm sitting in the corner of the bar crying for multiple reasons, but mostly just that. And injuries have killed me this year, and they sadden me very much so.
So suffice it to say that you're pretty happy to move on to week 3 at this point.
Well, I'm just going to make my first initial lineup. I'm going to make it, and then I'm not going to play any of them because I know that they're all probably going to the.
Yeah, let me know who you have on that lineup so I can avoid all of them as well. True story, actually, this last week I was really interested in Melvin Gordon, mostly because I like the way he's looked, and I kind of felt like his usage was going to start going up. And then because of that stout Jaguars run defense, I eventually was like, oh, hey, JM, do the smart thing and don't play Melvin Gordon. So, yeah, as a single lineup guy, it's tough to pull the trigger on a play like that. But that would have made the week.
As a multi-lineup guy, it's just as hard.
Yeah, right. I did roll with LeGarrette Blount and then paid up for David Johnson, but I could have had a little bit more flexibility had I gone Blunt and Melvin Gordon. So did either of you guys use TJ Yeldon this last week?
Yeah, I used him a ton with Woodhead almost entirely. I had Kelvin Benjamin in 75% of my lineups, and I played a lot of them. I'm not Kelvin Benjamin, Travis Benjamin. I loved that whole game. I thought that was going to be the game to have. I had every bit of Hearns and Robinson that hurt me also. Bortles actually ends up putting up a good number, as you predict he will. He's going to throw for 350 yards every week, so everybody should just take him as long as he's below 7,000 on DraftKings or below 8,000 even. He's going to have his good weeks where he puts up 40. That was the game that I had. I was all over it. I thought Yeldon was an awesome play, but I don't really know how high his upside is after watching that game.
Yeah, Grant, did you have Yeldon this last weekend?
I had almost entirely David Johnson, Yeldon, Woodhead, and Blunt. So I put up a few 190s on DraftKings with Woodhead in the lineup because of my running backs. And
Man.
again,
yeah, Yeldon, we were talking about that. Jeff and Adam and I talked about that Friday night where it was like this was the same spot last year where Evan Silva and I were trying to convince everyone that Yeldon was a good play against the Chargers, and then he just sucks. So thankfully I didn't get on him this week. Like, I'm so sick of this Yeldon thing. He can't do anything when he's
no, he's got to break one at least. That's your hope with him. And the truth is, the way they run their offense is completely towards every receiving option is always going to be a great GPP option, and Bortles is always going to be a great GPP option. Every single week, I don't care who they're playing, just because of how they play, and they're going to throw the ball that many times. Yeldon is a good pass catcher out of the backfield. How many touchdown receptions does he have in his career? 1, 2? It's
like 1 rushing touchdown or 2 rushing touchdowns as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just never going to be a maximum GPP play. It's a fine cash game play in certain spots, and this would have been one of those spots. But looking back at it, without Woodhead being in the game, I like the pairing, the combo, because they were cheap and it made it easy to afford all the high-end receivers who I'm sure we'll get to who failed it miserably. But, anyway, Yeldon is very worthless in the way they run their offense.
Yeah, agreed. And this week, of course, Chris Ivory should be back this week, and then we'll have a whole nother mess to deal with other low-priced running backs we'll have to sort through, and obviously we're going to get to those guys later as well. So since this is our first podcast for listeners, I'm going to kind of lay out what we're going to do here. We're going to have a section called Trend or Trap, and we're going to look at 5 different things we saw the previous weekend that stood out to us and talk about whether we think those are trends moving forward or traps. Then we'll have a love at first sight section where we each talk about the game that stands out to us the most for the upcoming week and kind of break that down a little bit. And then we're going to close out each week with a Money Matters section where we're going to talk about some of the low-priced options that are standing out to us early in the week. So obviously these are all early week thoughts. We're recording this right after Monday Night Football ends and getting it out to you guys Tuesday morning. So some of our thoughts will change on this. Keep up with us throughout the week, but this is a good idea of where we are to start. And a lot of times you see lineups really, I've talked to some, top end DFS players who talk about how they rarely change off their first lineup just because a lot of times your initial thoughts really are the sharpest thoughts. You have all the information and knowledge already, and then you kind of talk yourself off of things throughout the week. So this gives us a chance to dig into our early week thoughts and for you guys to kind of capture our thoughts of where we're at and take those into account. So trend or trap. The big game this last weekend that everyone was on, and anybody who read or listened to my stuff knows that I mostly faded it, was the Giants and Saints game. So it wasn't necessarily that I saw a path to a 13-16 game. It was more just that ownership was going to be so high, and I thought there was equal upside in other spots. Carson Palmer was my cash and tournament quarterback. Some other wide receivers who had as much upside as Odell Beckham, but it ended up being a really disappointing game, and I do wonder if part of it is because of this Giants defense. We know that they've rebuilt this defense in the offseason. So my question, Grant, we're going to start with you. Do you think that the Giants defense is legitimately good, or do you think that was just the Saints struggling on the road?
I 100% think it's just the Saints struggling on the road. You look at Drew Brees' numbers. I think he had 9 touchdowns on the road last year. his home road splits earlier on in his career were not as extreme as they were last year. Ones really were last year. And I think it happened to be a trap game last week, and it just didn't go the way most people thought it was. And I think that the Giants' defense is not very good, and I'm happy that they actually put up a decent number against Drew Brees this last week, because now people are actually going to think that they're actually decent defense, and no one's really going to be on it with Cousins.
Bobby, what's your take on that?
I would share some of that sentiment. I wouldn't say 100%. I would say that I would give it 65. I wasn't in love with the Saints offense. I was in love with Willie Snead. He had a fine game, but he was the one guy who I really targeted. I took a little bit of Ingram just because I'm just wondering to see how that plays out. Everybody knows we don't need to get into the numbers, but the drastic differences between Brees on the road and at home. But this wasn't a typical day where you should have trouble on the road. It's a little bit worrisome to me for both offenses more than I give credit to either defense, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's mostly where I'm taking this. But every time New Orleans is at home, looking at their secondary, I don't understand how they weren't massacred. This is the worst defense. This is the worst secondary in the NFL, or one of the worst 3 back fours in the NFL, back fives. Sorry. I mean, really, and they lose Delvin Breaux, who probably was their best player, which is really weird to say coming out of training camp in the first week. I don't understand why everybody wouldn't light them up. But again, I'm going to probably wait to target them in New Orleans, in the Dome, where they tend to get into shootouts. They're going to be in every game. It's going to be a great time to target both sides.
I think that's a great point because, in order for a shootout to occur, both sides have to go off. And people forget that Drew Brees is pretty unlikely to go off on the road, which makes it tough to get into these big back and forths. And you guys know me and how ridiculous I am with my schedule and my obsession with work. So I've already watched 11 of the games from this last weekend, including rewatching this Saints-Giants game last night. And what was interesting to me was Sterling Moore, who we all know is not a good cornerback. He was playing like 10 yards, 12 yards off of Odell Beckham most plays. And the Giants were content to just throw to him underneath. He was all running like slants and 8-yard hitches. And, if the Giants are going to do that, then other teams will happily just play their cornerback 10 yards off of them and make the Giants march down the field. So I thought that was pretty interesting because the Giants really didn't seem intent on attacking.
That is interesting. I'll give one weird little exception, though, to Odell Beckham's day, because I was a big fan of Beckham, and I knew that people were going to be all over him. He did drop what would have been – maybe it wasn't going to be a touchdown. It probably would have been.
It was a touchdown, yeah.
If he catches that ball, that his DraftKings points, I think, changed from 15.6 to somewhere. It basically goes about – I think it goes about 13 points higher because of the –
Yeah, he would have gotten the 100-yard bonus.
Yeah, maybe so 14 points-ish higher. And all of a sudden he's the number 1, or I guess he would have been the number 2 behind Diggs, wide receiver of the day. That was a drop. And that was not going to happen very often. I haven't seen him drop a ball like that ever. I watched him play at LSU. He did never do that. That was
one against Josh Norman last year that he dropped as well. Those are the only ones we've seen.
The 80-yarder that he missed, and then he ended up making up for it because he had a huge game anyway. But
so before we move on to the next trend or trap, Grant, I'm going to ask you this question. I don't know how you guys felt coming into the season, but coming in, I felt Kirk Cousins was really undervalued by the DFS community. He's obviously had an awful start to the year. But if we assume that Kirk Cousins is ready to bounce back, we have Redskins against the Giants this next week. So, Grant, you were saying you think that the Giants defense is not legit. Is that a spot that you would look to target at low ownership, say a Kirk Cousins, Jordan Reed, Deshaun Jackson sort of stack?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm targeting Cousins that much, but I am absolutely targeting most of the receivers on the team. He has so much talent around him. Again, I think it's against a terrible defense, and no one wants to play Reed anymore because of his first 2 weeks. But the targets are there, everything's there, and they've had some tough matchups. or semi-tough matchups the last 2 weeks, and it just seems to be out of whack right now. And I think that'll change fairly quickly. People forget that Cousins was the most accurate passer in the league last year, and probably I think they had the most accurate passer in Redskins history last year in Cousins. So it's kind of ridiculous to me that people are just dismissing him after 2 games.
I mean, the Cowboys do a tremendous job on Jordan Reed. So,
yeah. Can I add on though to a little bit of the Jordan Reed love? I want to say that Jordan Reed this is not an exaggeration. It's not like over the top. The best tight end is Gronkowski. The best DFS tight end is Jordan Reed. It will be Jordan Reed as long as he's lower priced than Gronkowski. If he's lower,
agreed.
It's never going to happen. He is the number 1 tight end by so far and away. First of all, do you know how many weeks last year Gronkowski was the number 1 DFS tight end? 1. And
1 week?
1 week. So if you're a cash game player, I understand it. It makes sense. He's consistent. When he's in the game, it's worth it. And it actually seems like a great GPP play. But in reality, that's not the case. Jordan Reed.
Yeah, and that's not even point per dollar. You're just talking raw score. And
it's raw score.
Yeah, and he's always the highest price guy.
Yeah. Jordan Reed you're getting him at a huge discount if you look at it like that. The only problem with taking Jordan Reed on a site like DraftKings especially, which is I think is like the ideal site if you want to take 2 tight ends because you can get that value in the 2,900s with a bunch of guys who are going to put up 12 to 14 points very likely. That's the only problem for him is that there are guys who are so cheap at the position who will put up the numbers he's going to put up most weeks, but when he has one of those weeks, he's going to put up 45 points and there won't be anybody even in the ballpark. And if people start forgetting about him too soon, they'll forget that he is the number 1 DFS tight end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great spot to look this next week against the Giants, who I think their defense is better than Grant thinks, but they definitely still have basically their entire scheme is predicated on letting the tight end run free. So I definitely like the idea of targeting Jordan Reed this next week. The next guy we're going to talk about has been mentioned already and is kind of on everyone's minds, and that is Stefon Diggs. I actually slept through that Sunday Night Football game because I had some MLB content to write, but I wake up and Diggs has like 38 points. So, Bobby, I'm going to start with you on this one. Is Diggs a trend moving forward or a trap?
Both. It's a really tough one. He's both, but he's more of a trend. It's just a great it's a great spot. I'm not going to love it next week because I'm more of a GPP player. I'm like Grant. I'm going to try and find the value where other people aren't. It's going to be hard because he's going to be so overdrafted.
Well, and here's a question, Bobby, for you. It's against the Panthers this next week. So I do wonder I do wonder if the matchup is going to scare people off and make him lower owned. Any thoughts on that?
Here we are on Monday night. I've made 2, hypothetical high-end lineups, and he's in both of them.
Yeah.
That's not, it's a price value thing. It's impossible. It's the same thing with Travis Benjamin. I cannot get over, and I think Carolina, the way they want to play football, it's going to be awesome for Cam. He was my number 1 quarterback last week. He will be every week going forward. They don't just want to beat people. He's their every weapon. I mean, it's the way that they're trying to hurt like the rest of the world, just based on a few bad things. Cam Newton plays with it anyway. I don't want to get way carried off on that, but overall, Diggs is in a great spot because they're going to have to throw the ball a lot if they want to keep up in the game. I love him next week. I didn't as much as a GPP player, but I still think he's a guy you have to go for.
All right, Grant, what about you, Stefon Diggs? Trend or trap?
I'm going to agree with Bobby and say both. You look at his beginning of his year last year. I don't know if you guys remember this, but certain people were saying, "Oh yeah, he could be the next Antonio Brown," which is just an insane thing to say. But
yeah, it is insane. Antonio Brown scored four fantasy points. He had 30.
5.9, Bobby. 5.9.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of AJ.
Yeah, but you look at his first 4 weeks last year, and he had around 10 targets. All 4 games he played there at the beginning. And he's really a guy that is going to be beautiful in DraftKings. I don't know how many touchdowns he's going to get. He only ended up with, I think, 4 last year. But he's going to hit that 100-yard mark on a consistent basis and get probably 7-8 catches on a weekly basis. And if he happens to stumble into the end zone, that already makes him a great, great value. I mean, depending on what his price skyrockets up to eventually. But I wouldn't go with him this week. I think it's a trap this week because people are going to be expecting it so much. He's going to be so heavily owned. You can go with it in cash, especially on a full PPR site, especially DraftKings. But for GBP, I don't think it's nearly worth it, especially since you can find better values at wide receiver all over the place, or even tight end if you want to throw it in the flex.
I'm gonna wrap up Diggs with my thoughts, and we'll move on to our third trend or trap. So with Diggs, the interesting thing for me is obviously this is a run first offense that could change depending on how long Adrian Peterson is out. Right now, it's looking like just a few weeks, but
with the tournament,
that was
realistically, you really don't know. You really don't.
Okay,
it could be a Derek situation where you're gone for a year. You really genuinely don't know. It could act up at any minute or not at all. It's just really impossible. There's no physical thing that will measure this.
So the big thing with Diggs is I think we all agree he's super talented, and the big issue standing in his way has been this offense that doesn't throw the ball. What people forget is that Norv Turner is their offensive coordinator, and Norv Turner used to be one of our favorite offensive coordinators to rely on for DFS because he's an aggressive offensive coordinator. He loves, taking shots downfield. And the only reason that they've morphed into this run first team is because they have Adrian Peterson and they had Teddy Bridgewater, who doesn't have a lot of arm strength, isn't a big downfield passer. So I do think that there's an opportunity for this to continue with Diggs actually seeing more targets per week as opposed to dropping down to the 5 or 6 range where he ended up settling into last year. So I am interested to dig into this matchup a bit more this week. I think that if we get to a point where we feel like the Panthers can put up points against the Vikings, who do have a legit defense, but like Bobby said, the Panthers don't just want to win. Same thing with the Cardinals. These two teams, they just want to score points. And so if we think the Panthers can score points at home against the Vikings, then the Vikings are going to pass, and Diggs could be an interesting play this next week. And definitely, we should all be listening to the chatter this week and seeing if people are saying, "Oh, stay off Diggs" because of the matchup, or if people are ready to jump on board. All right, so the next one we want to talk about, and we'll try to move through this one a little bit quicker, but the Jaguars revamped their defense. Their head coach is Gus Bradley, who's a former defensive coordinator of the Seahawks. So what the excuse before was the Jaguars didn't have the personnel. Now they have pretty strong personnel. I know Prince Amukamara missed this last game at cornerback, but they don't have a bad defense on paper, and yet they're still getting lit up. So obviously we love targeting the last year because their defense gave up so many points, and Blake Bortles would just go off in garbage time. So after 2 weeks, Jaguars looked better against the Packers, but looked awful against the depleted Chargers. So, Grant, what do you think? Is this Jaguars defense just bad again, or did they just have a bad game?
I think it was a bad game, but they're not great. I mean, they're not the defense they were last year, but they're not good. People kind of forget that, okay, yeah, the Chargers lost Keenan Allen. They lost Woodhead in the second half. But their offense is kind of like that of the Patriots or of a Chip Kelly offense. It doesn't really matter who's in there. They can score, and they can score a lot of points. So I think that
that's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, Chargers are my favorite offense in the entire league this year. They will be whoever's in there unless they get down to their 5th-string wide receiver, in which case at least it'll be cheap. But, yeah, I do not think that the Jags are that bad. I do not think that they're that good. And you can target against them. Just don't expect them to give up 38 points every single week.
All right, Bobby, what's your take on the Jags D?
I think it's all about style of play. I think it has a lot more to do with the way they choose to play their offense. Look how many times they throw the ball 30-plus times versus everyone else in the NFL. Look how many times they throw 35-plus, 40-plus times. It's not just because they're coming from behind. It's their style of play. They don't give the ball to Yeldon inside the 20. They just do not run the ball, when they're in the red zone. They play up tempo. There's a lot of stoppages. They are, I think last year they were 3rd. I'm not 100% on this, but I believe they were 3rd or 4th in terms of possessions per game per opponent. I think the Jags are an ideal team to target against and target going forward.
What about this week against the Baltimore Ravens? pass happy Mark Trestman. I mean, it's going to be a lot of passing in this
I think
Ravens Jaguars game.
I think Steve Smith is one of the best values of the week. I had barely looked at it, but that's one guy who stands out. It's a number of targets. If he happens to get in the end zone twice, it's possible. He could also break one. He's old, but it's not like he's done, and it's 4,100 on DraftKings. I think that it's a great spot to target against them. I actually love Mike Wallace. I love that matchup. From the second they went there, me and Grant and some other friends have been joking about it. It's a perfect combination with Flacco. It's just a great spot to target against them and to target them as well. I'm very questioning of the Baltimore D as well, and I'm looking for games to target. If you want to win big in DFS GPPs when it comes to football, you have to have somewhat of a game target where you're getting 3 players from one game.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good spot this next week. I loved Mike Wallace this last week. I didn't really get onto him until Saturday night or Saturday evening, and I texted some people whose opinions I trust, and they were all kind of tepid on him. I still almost pulled the trigger. Turned out the team I messed around with him, actually, the overall team would have scored 5 fewer points than what I got. But yeah, I mean, I really liked him a lot, and will continue to like him moving forward. All right, so this next one is a really interesting one, and that is Dez Bryant, who I don't have all the stats committed to memory yet, but he had like 2 targets in week 1, right? And then he had like 10 or 12 targets in week 2. So the Cowboys talked about, obviously we know coach speak, they're not always telling the truth, or they'll say things and then not actually follow through. But the Cowboys talked about wanting to get the ball to Dez more after week 1. And he was very clearly the first look on a lot of these passing routes. And it's not like Dak Prescott is scared to push the ball downfield. It's not like he is Blaine Gabbert or something. And he looked good throwing to Dez. So my question on Dez, Bobby, is trend or trap? Are they going to keep getting him involved, or do we need to wait for him until Romo comes back at this still higher end price?
See, this is a tough question. I would say if you're talking about a 4-week span, I would say that it's a trap. If you're talking about the rest of the year, it's a trap. If you're talking about 2 to 3 weeks of the year, which is what's important in DFS, there will be spots for Dez. This may even be one of them. It's a strange situation with the way that they run their offense. When they play the way that they play against teams that are similar, like they did against the Giants, although they ended up getting out a lot of passing plays in that game. But they play the way they were the slowest paced team in the NFL last year. It's really hard because if they run the ball successfully, it's not a great team to target against or target themselves. I'm not in love with Dez.
I'm going to jump in with, this is such a weird week in DFS because we're going to get to some of the games here in a moment. But as far as like over-unders, there's only, if we take away the Monday night game, which is not on either main slate, there's only one game with an over-under above like 48. And there's a lot of weird matchups. Like we know the Cowboys want to run, but the Bears have a good run defense this year. I mean, they have an awesome front seven and an awful secondary. So it sets up well for the Cowboys to pass against them. But then the question is, does it matter? Like, can the Bears actually score points and force the Cowboys to pass? Probably not. So there are a lot of weird things where things just don't line up to create a perfect matchup.
That's a great point.
So yeah, I see what you're saying with Dez. Like there's going to be weeks and you have to figure out, I mean, for one thing, the other team has to get the lead so that Dak has to pass.
Exactly.
But all right, Grant, what are your thoughts on Dez?
I don't think he's going to be thrown to Dez at all. I mean, he seems to – people forget that a rookie QB, his best friend is the tight end, and he has a – Bobby, thanks for jamming in. Yeah, you look at Witten's targets, not only last year, but the first 2 weeks of the season, they're just off the chart, and they're going to continue to be that way. He's just going to be the bailout for Dak every single time he gets into trouble. And then Beasley is looking like – I'm trying to think of a metaphor.
Beasley's still 3,200 on DraftKings this next week.
Yep, we'll get to him later.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, no, I'm with you on that. All right, we're taking up a lot of time on these, so we're gonna move on to the final one. And Grant, I'm gonna let you show some love to your Chargers. Let's talk about Travis Benjamin. Trend or trap moving forward?
Trend. There's no question about it. They had time to rearrange the offense around to replace Keenan Allen as the top target. a guy in whatever Williams or whoever it is. But we saw Benjamin get tons of targets, which he actually happened a few times.
Now he got, if I remember correctly, he got 6 targets, right? And that's the same that Tyrell Williams got.
I know, but his
He
were
just
a
did
lot
a
deeper
ton with
targets.
those targets.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that he only has missed 1 target that didn't become a reception is
definitely makes his line look really good.
Yeah, but I mean, Rivers is gonna find his favorite target in any offense. Woodhead's out, so that's gone. And Gates, his targets don't really increase or decrease at all if Keenan Allen or anyone else is out. He's gonna be consistent and can just get the same amount regardless of the offense. But Benjamin, I believe, is gonna be the top guy in that offense. So we'll see pretty soon if I'm right or wrong. But I absolutely love him and we'll play him every week. And now I'll probably get injured. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, Chargers fans. All right, Bobby, what do you think on Travis Benjamin?
Easiest trend of trends. I was just happy I spotted it before, I guess everyone did, but I guess a lot of people still did. But I thought he makes so much sense. With Woodhead gone, it's absurd, especially because he can catch the ball coming out of the backfield. They can run reverses for him. He can fill a lot of those same even voids. I can see him next week having – part of the reason he only had 6 targets because they were playing from a 2 to 3 score lead the whole time. Yeah. I really think that going forward, he's one of the top receivers, period. He'll be a top 10 receiver until things change, which they obviously will. But he's a guy who, if he's below the top 10 in pricing, he's the easiest play in cash and GPPs. Doesn't matter. He's so obvious, and he has a huge, huge upside. Phillip Rivers has never been one to like shy down, even when they've been 4-12 or 5-11. They were competitive in every game. I mean, the guy they're just a trend.
Man, I was down on Benjamin this last week just because I thought he was going to get all. I mean, the week before after Keenan Allen went out, I forget exactly what it was, but it was like 6 catches for 30 yards or something like that. Like I just thought that he was going to be close to the line of scrimmage, with Tyrell Williams being, more of the Keenan Allen role. I'm definitely going to be taking a much closer look at Travis Benjamin this week because that one hurt a little bit this last week. Thankfully, I would have actually been, if I just made the Travis Benjamin for Julius Thomas swap, I would have been in first place in a couple qualifiers going into Sunday night with no seeming way for anybody to pass me. And then after Stephon Diggs went off, I would not have won those. So that would have been painful. Anyway, so it worked out all right.
That is real. So can I ask you a quick question though?
Yeah.
So you play one lineup. Do you play one lineup on how many sites? Different lineups on different sites. Like what are we talking about here?
So it's one lineup on it depends. So right now with baseball and football overlapping as far as content creation, I'm at like 90 hours of work each week. So I have less time to mess around. Like I really like to mess around with rosters a lot. So I have less time to mess around with rosters on multiple sites. So I actually didn't plan to play on FanDuel this last week and then made a late week decision too, which was too bad because I didn't do as well on there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I messed around all week, with one cash lineup on DraftKings and one tournament lineup. And then what typically happens is by the time I get closer to the end of the week, those merge into one and I just use the same team across the board. Mm-hmm. And then I'll use a similar version on other sites depending on how pricing
right,
shakes out.
Sure, that makes sense. Wow, it's a whole different game.
But one thing that's interesting about pricing that I found is, so for instance, Carson Palmer was more expensive than Eli on FanDuel, whereas he was a great value on DraftKings. LeGarrette Blount was only $300 less than Rashad Jennings on FanDuel. I actually liked LeGarrette Blount more, but with Rashad Jennings right there, I couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger. I didn't use Carson Palmer on FanDuel because he wasn't, quote, as great of a value. And it's interesting because you can look at things like, okay, nobody's going to play LeGarrette Blount at $6K on FanDuel when Rashad Jennings is $6,300, which really guarantees such low ownership. Whereas on DraftKings, LeGarrette Blount was $4K. So it's easier to justify, he's so much cheaper than some of the other guys. So that is kind of really an interesting game theory thing I've picked up. Some of my best weeks on FanDuel last year were when I just transferred my DraftKings team over and just said, screw pricing, because then you have such a differentiated lineup because people get so boxed into thinking point per dollar that if you can say, okay, I think all these guys are good plays, and the pricing doesn't match up quite the way it does on DraftKings, but that really lowers ownership, which is an interesting out. So
yeah, you're right.
Yep.
Okay, so we wanted to keep this to under an hour. We're at like 37 minutes already. So we still have our Love at First Sight, where we're each going to talk about a game that stands out to us, and then Money Matters, where we're going to talk about some of the cheaper players that stand out at each position. So we'll kind of move things along here, but we have a treat for you guys, Love at First Sight. We're going to let Grant tell you a little story each week and then tie it into the game that he sees starting out. So Grant, why don't you take it away with your Love at First Sight story?
Yeah, so I've fallen in love way too easily with food, women, and sports. But so this week we're going to talk about out at a nice little place, me and a few of my buddies, and I'm rocking a terrible, terrible, terrible mustache. And I see three girls, somehow get them to come over our table and realize, wow, I'm the worst looking person at this table by a wide margin. What am I going to do? So I just straight up go John Nash game theory on things and try and figure out which one of them my buddies want to talk to, and then just completely leave them alone. And I realize that's pretty much the best play. Otherwise, I am in terrible, terrible luck. So I'll go after the least desirable one to my other buddies, get her number, lose it, of course, because I have a terrible memory, and love of my life is now gone forever. But anyways, this week, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, and Odell Beckham Jr. are all going up against what should be terrible, terrible defenses. Although the way Philly played tonight makes it seem like less so. But everyone's going to be so ecstatic about Odell Beckham and Julio Jones this week. And I'm going to be on my boy Antonio Brown because he put up a dud last week, which is the first sign of the apocalypse. And this week he's got a favorable matchup, and Pittsburgh is just going to go buck wild all over Philadelphia. They're playing a little bit of a shortened week, although that doesn't matter at all because it's just Pittsburgh. They are the best offense in the league by a wide margin, and Antonio Brown's going to go crazy, and his ownership will be much, much lower than it should be, which is 87.5%. So yeah. I love Pittsburgh this week, and I'm so excited that Antonio Brown is the least favorable out of all three of them and the most expensive.
Yeah, I mean, that's an awesome point because Antonio Brown genuinely should – I mean, he's the only guy who consistently has a shot at 40 points. And, you know, he should be 30% owned each week, 40% owned each week as such. And that would make it a tougher decision, but he's probably not going to be – week. Bobby, I'm sure you love that because you wrote up in some of your Roto Grinders premium content this last week in calling the Steelers the Coors Field of football because of the points that offense puts up and forces the other team to chase after. So
in terms of
Bobby,
fantasy points, yeah, it makes sense because especially with the bonuses and the 300 yards and the 100 yards on DraftKings, when you're forced to play in that style of offense just to try and keep up, and everybody's going to try and keep up at least as far as they can. It's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot that you're going to have to throw the ball 45 times. You're going to throw for 300 yards. Even if
it definitely creates a great game stack spot as well. Bobby, I have a pretty good guess as to what your Love at First Sight game is, but you want to break it down for us?
San Diego, Indianapolis is the obvious one.
Naturally.
I can't even understand how this is not – I don't understand why the over-under is where it's at. I think it'll change. I don't know why it is. I just don't understand why it is where it is. Both of these defenses are – to say questionable would be a huge compliment to both defenses. They're pretty awful. They're both bottom 10 pass defenses. They're both awful run defenses, but it doesn't really help because I just can't bring myself to ever take Frank Gore in a serious lineup. In terms of GPPs, he's the nightmare because, with a 20-point ceiling at 5,000, it's just absolutely impossible. It's going to be incredibly rare that he breaks out for any game higher than 20 points. But that game in general, Travis Benjamin, T.Y. Hilton, I absolutely love. I actually love either quarterback, but I would prefer Bortles. I love Julius Thomas. I love Dwayne Allen.
I mean, Philip Rivers.
I'm sorry, Philip Rivers. I'm also in love with the Jacksonville game. Sorry, that was an accident. That was a slip up. But yeah, no, that is. I feel like there's so many spots. I think Moncrief's a great play. There's so many ways to target that game that make a lot of sense to me. That I think that it'll be a bulk focus of a lot of my lineups. Just looking at it this early in the week.
Yeah, and definitely, and like we talked about earlier, just stacking a game is such a great way to go, and this is a really good spot to do that as well. And we're gonna get to some of the cheaper guys here in a moment, but one guy who's standing out to me early on is Philip Dorsett, because if Dante Moncrief is unable to go this game, that really narrows the target distribution on the Colts and makes it a little bit easier for us to figure out who those passes are going to go to in this one. So for me, the game that I have picked out is Oakland and Tennessee. And I'm really like this Oakland defense. It's a bit like the Jaguars, but even more so. I mean, they have so much talent and they've just been unheard from this year. Sean Smith is getting roasted. I brought up last week that after week 1 last year, when Sean Smith was on the Chiefs, everyone started going out of their way to target him because he had a horrible week 1. And then he, was basically the number 1 cornerback in football the rest of the way. And so this year, he got roasted week 1, whatever. But then he came back and got roasted week 2. So I don't know what's going on with that secondary. If I remember correctly, David Amerson went out, got hurt in this game this last week, and he's their stud corner on the other side. Yeah. So Oakland is not as bad against the tight end as everybody thought last year, but they're still not great. It's a good spot for Delaney Walker, Tajay Sharp, Marcus Mariota, especially, if Derek Carr is able to put up points against this poor Tennessee pass defense. It'll lead to Mariota having to keep up and use his legs. So I definitely think that's an interesting spot to look to and might be a little bit overlooked by the DFS community as well. I'm going to move on to our final section, which is called Money Matters. And I'm basically going to bring up just a few of the guys who are standing out to me early in the week at the lower end of the price range, just so we can kind of figure out early on where we can build our lineups around some value. So there's very clear value that there were a lot of running back injuries in week 2. So we're going to have a lot of fill-in running backs, and most people are just going to take the obvious path. I mean, people who read a lot of content or listen to a lot of, podcasts and videocasts. I mean, I know that on the Friday Night Round Table last year, probably 16 out of 17 weeks, Adam and I just talked about how important it is to pay down at running back when you can. Well, once that gets pounded into the public consciousness so much, everybody looks to do that. So an interesting way to approach this week would be to look for value at other positions. Everybody will be able to pay down at running back and then pay up at quarterback or wide receiver or wherever they want to go. So it will be interesting to look for value at quarterback and tight end and wide receiver, and maybe pay up at running back where you can get great players at low ownership. If you take price out of the equation, I always talk about, I really want to be able to see a clear path to 20 points for any player I target. So if you take price out of the equation, there's going to be some cheap wide receivers who have a clear path at 20 points. And obviously some top running backs have the same thing. And then you can get a totally different lineup with the same upside other people have. So we're going to go through the values at each position, starting with quarterback. And the two guys that stood out to me were Marcus Mariota. Again, he's going to be playing against the Raiders, who have shown really poorly on defense so far. But more importantly, Derek Carr and company should be able to put up points against Tennessee, who has a good run defense. Dick LeBeau stacks the box more than just about any other defensive coach in football, which slows down the run and puts a lot of pressure on the back end of that defense. So I think Carr and Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree can put up points, and this will lead to the Titans having to play catch-up against what has so far been a suspect Raiders defense. The other guy is Dak Prescott, and I'm not certain if I'll actually pull the trigger on him, but it's funny to me how much he's gone from chalk to contrarian in such a short span of time.
Yeah, that is interesting.
If we think the Redskins can put up points and there's going to be some positive touchdown regression, Dak has run one in but not thrown any yet. If there's going to be some positive touchdown regression, and if we think the Redskins can put up points, if we think Kirk Cousins can bounce back, then this could be a good spot for some Dak love in tournaments at low ownership. So those are the two guys that stand out to me. Grant, anybody standing out to you on the lower end of the price range at quarterback?
I mean, why are we mentioning Jacoby Brissett? I don't even know how to say his name. Can't pronounce anyone's name. But he's only 5 games.
Thursday, man.
Oh, gosh darn. All right, then my favorite person in the entire world with a beautiful beard, Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's only 5,900.
Wow.
I mean,
love him.
I love him every week. He has one of the best offenses around him in the entire league.
I thought you were going to say one of the best.
Absolutely love everyone. I know you're not a big fan of Decker, but he's one of the most consistent wide receivers out there. Marshall's just a physical freak.
Bobby, are you not a fan of Decker?
Don't you think taking Fitz on his own makes more sense, though?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing to me.
I have a real theory behind that.
Well, okay, this year maybe so. In the past, I would have said no because
look at the price.
It's like the Texans. The target distribution is so narrow that you know where the ball is going. This year with Decker playing on the outside and Enunwa in the slot,
exactly,
it definitely changes things. Yeah.
If anything, it makes Enunwa the play, depending on his price this week, which is up to 4,800. So it's not as interesting, especially because he got that slight injury last week. But yeah, that is an interesting idea. You sort of blew my mind there with that pick there, Grant. I think it's a really good.
Nobody's ever on Fitzpatrick. I mean, that's an awesome call for sure. All right, Bobby, what are you seeing at quarterback?
Phillip Rivers.
Yeah.
I'm pretty into that game. In case you haven't noticed, I think that they're going to be either in a spot where they're playing from ahead, which is going to be because of Phillip Rivers, or they're going to be playing from behind, in which case Phillip Rivers will go off. It's an ideal spot, especially playing on the turf in Indianapolis. It's a huge stadium upgrade, if you will, in terms of football. And the pace.
You know that we're still in baseball mode and we're saying stuff like stadium upgrade.
I know, but it's true though. I mean, there's still factors in.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially on turf up there, especially with guys like Travis Benjamin, who have always been deep threats anyway. T.Y. Hilton, Moncrief, all awesome plays. But Phillip Rivers is one of my favorite low-priced quarterbacks. I think the Mariota thing is a trap to me. I'm a little bit afraid. I actually like the Raiders' D a little bit. But I do think that there's a chance that if the game plays out a certain way, in certain situations, he's going to have 2 games every year where he goes crazy, and I guess this is as good a spot as any.
The thing with Mariota is he's going to get I pulled this stat out last week. In his 11 starts last year, he only had 4 games under 20 points. And, only one under 14 points, and that was against the Panthers. And the other ones were against the Bills, who had a much better defense last year, and the Dolphins, which was like kind of a WTF thing. And then I forget who the other one was, but like some tougher opponents, maybe the Patriots. And he's like, obviously the Raiders defense, like just like the Lions defense was last week, the Vikings week before, because Mariota's probably going to give up a fumble 6 or a pick 6, but then that just puts him in a deeper hole that he has to come back from. I guess maybe I don't see his ceiling being plus points this week, but I definitely think he has a high floor. And you're probably right. Like this isn't going to be one of those blow up weeks for him, but
it could. I think
he's so like generous to the opposing defense that it's easy to forget that he still kind of gets his as far as fantasy points each week.
I think the Dak.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm being a Mariota truther because then I'll feel obliged to play him this week. I really don't have that much interest in him, but bringing up some interesting points on him.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like Fitzpatrick, I think is an awesome call because nobody ever goes there. And then, I mean, Vontae Davis should be out again for the Colts. Darius Butler got hurt this last week. I mean, that Colts secondary, I mean, poor guys. They already had one of the least talented secondaries out there, and now they're like on their 4th and 5th and 6th options back there. I mean, Phillip Rivers should just rip them apart. So.
Also, keep in mind that he produces numbers and kids like crazy and may be working for Skynet.
The kids thing is definitely important. Like, that's an important function. What is he up to, like 7 now? 8, 9?
I can't
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think I guess we shouldn't get into too many details about how that happens, but I think I think he's Catholic, so they don't believe in
interesting
form of birth control. So Phillip Rivers is just family man out there. All Okay, so the next position we want to talk about. We had a very firm and solid statement that we're going to keep everything on this show PG-13, which was a necessary statement to create with Grant on the show. So
We did it. Right?
We got to be careful with anything that goes on with Grant in the fold.
They don't let me out of the house too often.
So running back, I'm going to bring up a few guys, and then Bobby, I'm going to throw it over to you to start with this one. We have a lot of injuries, but a lot of not great spots and a lot of potential committee backfields. Vikings should be without Adrian Peterson, but they're playing the Panthers. Panthers are almost certainly without Jonathan Stewart, but they'll probably activate Cameron Artis-Payne this week. It won't be all Fozzie Whitaker. They'll use Mike Tolbert as well. Cam Newton will get carries, and they're playing the Vikings. Dolphins play the Browns, which is the most generous running back matchup you could ask for with Arian Foster out, but then Jay Ajayi is awful. Lions might be the best spot to take advantage of the value with Amir Abdullah likely out. Theo Riddick, if we think he's going to get 20 touches against Green Bay. We all know how we feel about Frank Gore. Bobby, you said earlier, Frank Gore is like a 20-point ceiling, which we really never want. And I wrote him down, but you're right. I mean, even against San Diego, that's a tough sell because you want a guy who can pop off for 30 points. Gore seems highly unlikely to do that. And then maybe my favorite value is going to be a guy who might go overlooked just because he's, I think, 5,800. And everybody will be looking to pay down, and that's Melvin Gordon against Indianapolis. I mean, he's great in the pass game. They don't use him as much because they have Danny Woodhead. But now that Woodhead's out, I think Melvin Gordon can get 5 or 6 catches and 18 carries against the Colts. And I really like Melvin Gordon, especially because there might be a lot more attention on San Diego wide receivers and leave Melvin Gordon overlooked for that reason as well. So, Bobby, any running backs you're seeing or anything that stands out to you on that side?
Well, I want to agree with your point. First of all, I think Melvin Gordon is such a great play. My fear is that he's a little too obvious, but I love him. I mean, it's anybody in the backfield who can play in any sort of passing game against Indianapolis this year, just target out of the backfield. This is a guy who can actually run the ball too. It's a great spot where they could be playing from ahead. If the only problem is if they do get further behind, I still like it. You know what? I think he's actually a really good play. My thing this week, just looking at it initially, is that I think everybody's going to try and go value at running back and try and pay up for receiving, which I would generally agree with. I don't this week. Just at my first glance, I think that there's 2 great spots to pay up for. I think Williams at Philadelphia, it's an ideal situation. He's going to go not overlooked, but it's such an obvious spot. And again, I think people are going to savor the position. And I would pair him with David Johnson. I think there's enough value at wide receiver where you can actually put those 2 in your backfield, play Phillip Rivers, Travis Benjamin, Cole Beasley, Steve Smith Sr., T.Y. Hill. There's a lot of guys you can throw in there with those 2 in your backfield that you can feel just as comfortable. Yeah, there probably will be a Julio Jones or Antonio Brown or OBJ who outperforms them. But that's the kind of lineup that I'd be looking at right now, just to go contrary a little bit. And again, it's contrary, but I think it also has the safety of almost being a cash type of style.
Yeah. And I think if like I was saying earlier too, it's really beneficial to take price out. If you can say, like I said, and that's how I can use the same team in cash generally that I use in tournaments, is because I'm looking for guys that I genuinely think can get 20 points with upside for more. And so it's easy this week to say, okay, here's all these cheap running backs who can do that, and then I'll load up at wide receiver. But there's also a lot of cheap wide receivers who can do that this week, and we'll get to that in a moment. And fewer people will be on those guys, which enables us to have the same upside everybody else has, but with a totally different roster. So if everybody else's rosters go off, if the chalk goes off, hopefully we can keep up. And if the chalk doesn't go off, we're in much better shape than everybody else. And that's one of those things too, where listening to our early week thoughts becomes really valuable because, we might all get tempted throughout the week to move off of that a little bit, but we're seeing early on, just looking at pricing at first glance, that's probably the best way to go. So definitely something to keep in mind. Grant, what are your thoughts on the running back position?
Did any of you guys say Crowell? I zoned out for a half second.
I did last.
No, and he's playing Miami, right? I mean, that's really interesting.
Yeah, Yeah, he was less than 1% owned this last week. He's going against the worst run defense. He put up 2 good games in a row. I don't know if you know this, but Cleveland's actually on their 22nd different quarterback this season. So he probably doesn't know what he's doing. So I love Crowell this week. I think he's a good GPP target because even if I talk to my friends who don't play DFS, I mention playing him in my year-long league, and they look at me like I don't know what I'm doing at all. And so I seem like a crazy person, which means it's a good play.
Yeah.
I need a guy in the league.
I love Hugh Jackson as an offensive mind, and obviously he does not have a lot of talent to work with in Cleveland, but he does get the most out of his players. He does maximize his offensive talent, and Crowell has shown well the first couple of weeks. It's not as if the Dolphins will get out to a massive lead. I actually got a text today from a really sharp football guy who said Ryan Tannehill this week. So maybe I'll reevaluate that opinion, but yeah, I mean, if this game stays close, Crowell's going to get 18 carries, and he could easily get 100 yards and a touchdown or two. All right, so let's move on to wide receiver.
One guy to talk about, Darren Sproles. Pittsburgh's great against the running back, but that's just because everyone has to throw every time, and Philadelphia is going to be down. They're going to be throwing the ball, so they're going to have Sproles in there. He has a chance for a huge game. I mean, I don't know if you saw tonight, but they rushed him in from the 1 yard line, and he's 3,700. So a high-scoring game with a guy that catches balls, why not?
If you want a 2% guy who can give you upside in that kind of a game, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so wide receiver, I'm just going to run through this list because it's ludicrous. These are all guys under 5K. Cole Beasley, Jeremy Curley, who, remember, Seattle, the one place they struggle is over the middle, just the way their defense is set up. Curley in the slot. Tyrell Williams is 4,300. Philip Dorsett is 4,400 if Moncrief is out in that shootout. Victor Cruz is still 4,700. Tajay Sharp is 4,700. Devontae Parker had 13 targets this last week. I know the Dolphins were in comeback mode, but he's 4,900. And then if you want to dip above 5K, you have Travis Benjamin, Stephon Diggs, Corey Coleman, Sterling Shepard, all just over 5K. So that's kind of a ridiculous list, and that shows what we're talking about. There's a lot of value. Bobby, anybody I missed in going through that list that stood out to you?
No, you nailed it with that list. I mean, Cole Beasley stuck out to me. The fact that he's still 3,200 is kind of silly. Travis Benjamin is absurd. They're the guy's just a little over 5,000. I like too. Steve Smith, I think, has a chance to have a massive game. I think that there are some guys though that are even medium value where everybody looks to pay for the 9,500 guys. Jarvis Landry should be the top receiver every week on DraftKings. Just for if you're going to play a cash game, why is he not your top receiver? What kind of game is going to happen where he's not going to get 12 targets?
Yeah,
and that's a rare. He can get as many as 25. He should be the top receiver every week. And he's great for tournaments because nobody drafts him. He's ideal for this. Like his points per game, if he scores some touchdowns, they're going to be higher than everybody's. That's the truth.
Absolutely.
He hasn't gotten in the end zone. That's it. And that'll happen. Anyway.
All right, Grant, what about you at wide receiver?
At the top end, Jordy Nelson, he's leading the league in red zone targets right now, and no one's playing him, and no one thinks he's healthy. And it's silly, and he has the best quarterback in the league. At the lower end, just some guys that you may have mentioned that, but I don't think you did, that are going to be off the board a little bit. Kevin White played well tonight. Great guy at 4K. Chris Hogan with another new quarterback in the offense. No one's going to be on him, and he's cheap. And he's got 11 targets this season. He's played well. He's got a touchdown. Jameson Crowder has 17 targets this season, and no one seems to know who he is. And everyone else in that Washington Redskins offense is being drafted a little bit. He's not being drafted at all. Yeah. And then last guy, Terrell Pryor, I don't think people know yet that he's not a quarterback anymore, and he's playing pretty well.
He might become one pretty soon if the Browns keep getting guys injured.
It's true. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of value at wide receiver, a lot of upside. So we have gone over the hour marks. We're going to run through tight end really quickly. Here's the guys who stood out to me, and I don't mind paying up at tight end. I mean, it's harder to get those 20-point games at tight end, but hey, Dennis Pitta did it this last week, and he's playing Jacksonville. He costs 3,400 in Jacksonville. It's that Seahawks defense that the Falcons run, the Jaguars run, that it's fundamentally susceptible to the tight end and to wide receivers over the middle. So Dennis Pitta at Jacksonville. Clive Walford, Tennessee is bad at covering the tight end. I rostered Walford in cash games and tournaments week 1, and then he kind of disappointed and then decided to do some work in week 2. He's 2,900. And Trey Burton, I had a buddy text me today about he was building a Monday, Thursday DraftKings lineup, and he asked if he should roster Brent Selleck. And I was like, no, don't roster Brent Selleck, roster Trey Burton. Brent Selleck was, I think, 40% owned, and Trey Burton was like 4% owned. And I checked with like 7 minutes left, and he was at 5 catches for 49 yards and a touchdown. I'm guessing that's where he ended up. But Trey Burton is the stone cold minimum, 2,500. And if Ertz continues to be out, which he should be, Trey Burton's going to be a great play. We talked earlier about rookie quarterbacks looking to their tight end. So, Bobby, anybody else at tight end that has stood out to you?
You really just first of all, I was all over Pitta. I love Julius Thomas, but the Trey Burton pick, you sold me completely.
That's what I'm here for. I'm here to ruin things for everybody and just get to it before you guys.
No, now I'm into it. I appreciate the help. Trey Burton, I'm all about it. I like actually paying up at tight end. I like generally paying up where other people are trying to pay down. And I think there's great spots to pay down, but I like paying up for Jordan Reed. I like paying up for Delaney Walker. I like Julius Thomas, not really paying up that much. I think Jason Witten's a fine cash game style play. Gary Barnidge is an awesome sleeper, especially after not having a big week this week. Even with the third stringer, it's who I can't even remember. Kessler, yeah. I think it's actually a great situation. He's a safety blanket. I actually think that there's an argument you can make for so many of these cheap tight ends that could have one of those kind of games because there's so many that seem in good spots. They're so similar that to me it screams of a week where it's worth it to pay up, especially when you have Jordan Reed in an ideal matchup and Delaney Walker in as good a matchup. I do believe the Raiders are as bad defensively against the tight end as anybody in football.
And, also you can pay, again, if you take price out of the equation, Dennis Pitta legitimately has 20-point upside, and he costs 3.4K. Pricing is so low on tight ends compared to other positions that if he were a wide receiver getting his targets that he's getting, he'd be 5K. You could play Dennis Pitta and Jordan Reed and basically say, okay, if these guys were wide receivers, they would cost a combined 13K, and instead they cost a combined 10K. And that opens up a lot of salary and still gets you that 20 plus point upside you want to look for. I definitely like the idea of paying up at tight end this week. Grant, what about you at tight end?
Play 2 tight ends this week. Play in your lineup. And these are the guys: Witten, Jesse James, Pitta, and Rudolph. Most of those, Jason Witten's the target leader, both in red zones and regular, for all tight ends so far this year. And he's playing with a rookie quarterback against a team that just got dismantled by a tight end who knows who the guy actually was. Rudolph has 17 targets this year. Pitta has 12 in the last game. Jesse James is taking over for Heath Miller and could get 3 touchdowns in any game, and the biggest offense in the entire league. Those guys, you want to go down a little bit more, Spharius Jenkins worth a shot in a million maker and not much else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the idea of using 2 tight ends. Like I said earlier, I did it this last weekend. It's generally frowned upon by sharp players, quote unquote, sharp players. But there's a lot of things that when you really think through them, you recognize, there's a fallacy in the thinking. And last year, coming into last year, nobody would ever use a running back along with a wide receiver and a quarterback until the Steelers came along and won like 3 millionaire makers for people. And then you realize, there's some places where this makes sense. There's a few other things that I've picked up over the last week that are, conventionally things people don't do. And you realize, this actually makes a lot of sense. And if you just look at where these guys should be priced, if they were playing a different position, these tight ends are really underpriced. And so if you feel like you can get 20 points from some of these guys, I definitely don't mind using 2 tight ends right now on weeks like this where there's a lot that stands out. So we're going to get out of here. Bobby, you have any final thoughts before we go?
No, actually, I thought you covered it all really well on the tight ends. I love doing the show with you guys. Hope we have a lot more to go, and just look forward to keeping it going. And again, stack San Diego, stack Jacksonville, stack against them all season long. Indianapolis as well, and you should be good to go.
Hey, Bobby, you're on Twitter, right? What's your Twitter handle?
It's at Bobby Fi, BOBBYFI.
All right, give Bobby a follow. Give Grant a follow. Grant, what's your Twitter handle?
Genie for 07, and guys, remember, don't eat $15 of Taco Bell and sit in a hot room afterwards.
We kept things PG-13 the whole time with Grant's presence. I am JM to win on Twitter at JM to win. Keep up with us throughout the week. We'll share our thoughts. We'll all have some content out there and other thoughts and whatnot. And I'll see you guys at the top of the leaderboards this weekend when it's all said and done.